So I want to start today's podcast out by telling my story really quickly on how I made the decision not to go to vet school and instead pursue a PhD and pursue education in science. Because when I was a young boy, I knew I was going to be a veterinarian. No doubt in my mind. That is what I wanted to do since I was like 4 or 5 years old. And that's like many of our veterinarians. They knew at a young age this was the career for them. I fell in love with animals and I specifically fell in love with horses. And after I went and got my undergraduate degree, or actually during my undergraduate degree, I knew I wanted to specialize in horses. I wanted to be an equine vet. In my undergraduate degree, I studied hard like all the pre-vetter students did. I had to actually put myself through my undergraduate program. So I was working and I didn't get the strongest grades. But in saying that, I had to do other things like I did ROTC to get a scholarship and I owed the Army a few years after I graduated and so on and so forth. When I got out of the military and then when I went in the private industry, making really good money, that drive of still wanting to be a vet was there. And I went to UC Davis and sat down with the admissions team and said, here's my undergraduate degree grades. Here's what I've done since. And I wouldn't have been as competitive compared to a lot of the students. And UC Davis is recognized as one of the best vet schools in the world. But that was my best shot of getting in because I was a California resident. Needless to say, I had to go and get my master's degree to boost my GPA, but I also had to finish out 2 courses, physics, second semester, and then an embryology course. Went off to do my master's and was getting nearly straight A's, doing really well. And I remember this day clearly in my head one day in the barn. Our equine veterinarian came out to scan some of our mares. And she came in and she was talking to me and Dr. Rodick. And I remember her telling us she was selling up her practice, that she couldn't make ends meet as an equine vet. And as somebody who'd been out in the world for a while, getting a paycheck, struggling, to pay bills, struggling to pay rent, and then finding a great job in the industry in pharmaceuticals, then getting out and going to graduate school and realizing she said she was making around $35,000 a year. And my jaw hit the ground. I was like, what? I didn't understand the business side of veterinary medicine. And for me, I really started to think deeply. I'm going to go to 4 years of medical school because that's what it took in the United States to become a veterinarian to make $30,000 a year, where I was waiting tables to put myself through my master's degree and I was making half that. And it made me do some soul searching. Now, many that get into veterinary medicine don't do it for the money. And we're going to find out today as we talk about, what vets are making. They do it for the passion of the animals. But I was like, how am I going to support a family? How am I going to pay bills? How am I going to put food on the table? And I pivoted and I applied for PhD programs, which are very hard to get. And I was very fortunate that I got in to the equine science program at Texas A&M, animal science, where I studied animal physiology, genetics, and that launched my career. But that was my path was veterinary medicine for most of my life. And I am mad about horses and I'm mad about animals. And at the end of this, I'll talk about like, I still reflect back like, ooh, maybe I should have, because that was one veterinarian in one area of the country. And we're going to find out vets make more than that, typically, equine vets, but they're not making money hand over fist. And I'm going to share a lot of what the veterinarians have to deal with, especially on the business side of veterinary medicine. But we're going to tell their story today. Your equine vet, their path, and we are in a crisis. I am going to tell you, we are in a veterinary crisis where we don't have enough equine vets around the world. I'm finding this on continent after continent, no matter where you live. Obviously, in the United States, we're going to focus a lot on that today because we have a lot of good data there in Canada. But in Europe, down in New Zealand and Australia, we are short veterinarians. Uh, in the developing world, they are in desperate need of food animal veterinarians and small animal veterinarians. And around the planet, we are losing veterinarians more than we're replacing them. And our animal populations are just growing. Our pets, our companion animals, our horses, our horse populations going up. And so it's a big concern. And at the end of the podcast today, I'm going to give you some tips on how you can help your equine vets and make their lives easier because they need it. Trust me, you're going to look at this data today and you're going to go, wow, I didn't realize we were in this crisis. And maybe some of you do know that. Maybe you do know your veterinarian very well, or you live in an area in the world where it's very difficult to find an equine vet to come out and treat your animal, or you have to trailer them to a hospital miles or kilometers away from where you live. So it is a very poignant and topical podcast today. Now, this follows up from last week's podcast on vaccines. And I was going to do this one on veterinarians, but I pushed it forward because last week I read a snarky article. I called it snarky, an opinion piece, which again, I said last week, I understand opinion pieces are meant to ruffle feathers and, get clicks, right? That's the big thing today, headlines and clicks. And this was a horse owner who was writing about how her young veterinarian showed up, didn't know what she was talking about, driving a 4x4 that she couldn't handle or she was too young. I mean, it was just venom, to be honest. And it really made me think after reading that it was so unfair to that young veterinarian who is doing her best. She probably was coming out of school within a few years, and this owner took out a lot of her frustration on her in her writing, and it was nasty, and I just didn't. It angered me, to be honest. I just was like, that's not fair, because I know the journey vets have to take, and I'm going to share that with you today. And I know how hard they work, and I know with all the stuff they have to deal with, you didn't need to write this snarky article because you didn't like a rule change that they're making for competitive horses, which is based on science, not money, as the author of that article insinuated. It was based on science. So you can check that one out if you want more about that. But it got me thinking about our equine vets and the crisis that we're in today. The statistics are concerning, and I didn't know how bad it was. I knew it wasn't great. I've been in the veterinary medicine field for 30 years now of my life, since I was really young, going to school, spending 11 years in the universities, getting my bachelor's, master's, and PhD, mentoring hundreds of students wanting to go to vet school and helping many of them get into vet school. Even my graduate students, who I got to know really, really well, inspiring them and helping guiding them into vet school, where many of them are now DVMs. But if we look at the data and what's coming out from these societies around the world, but again, particularly in the US, they estimate there are 3,785 veterinarians in the United States in 2022, so just a couple years ago, that are equine focused. That's their clinical practice. So that's not many across 50 states. And if you haven't been to the United States, it's a massive country. Roughly, 8 million horses officially, but unofficially, they think there's about 10 million horses in the country. And that is just 4.1% of all practicing vets in the country. That's an important statistic to remember. 4% of all veterinarians in the United States are equine related, but we're graduating them. About 1% of the graduates are going into the equine field. So we are losing. And when you look at the AEP and AAVMA, the vet associations, the equine associations, they said we are having trouble not just retaining equine vets because they are retiring. A lot of them are getting older. Recruiting, getting veterinary students interested in pursuing equine medicine. And I'm going to break down why a little bit later. What is the barrier of me saying, I want to go to vet school. I go into veterinary medicine. I intend to be an equine vet, maybe, but I'm interested in these other fields. And a lot of these students just go off in these other fields and they don't end up being equine vets. Now, I was going equine medicine. It was either zoo or equine vet medicine. Being a zoo vet, job opportunities were really low. So I was like, no, I definitely just going to stick with my babies and go to horses. That is where I intended to go into vet school. Now, there was a survey done of all the graduates leaving veterinary school in 2020. So recent data. And there was, surveys were sent out to 3,243 veterinary students, and they got back 2,874 responses. So very, very good response. And they asked them, which practice were you going into? Now, one of the things you're going to find out when I talk about some of the data in vet school today in the 2020s, and I saw this in the 2000s, in the last 20 years, where the majority of your graduates or those even applying to vet school are women. It is becoming a field more dominant by women, which plays into some of this about it being an equine practitioner. Now, why veterinary medicine is becoming more women dominated, I didn't find any surveys on that. Just from my personal experience, I think it is so difficult to get into vet school. And obviously I've had male students go off to be DVMs. Many of them are DVMs today. They're my good friends. But a lot of them, I don't know if they can put up with the rigor, the academic rigor. I think that's just my own personal experience. It is so hard to get into vet school. And some of them, maybe they look at the money involved and realize it's not worth it. It's not worth going into debt for. Other factors I think vet schools need to look at more and on how to recruit more men into the field, which is fine. And there isn't any data. I couldn't find any data on why more women are applying to vet school. But I mean, they're all wonderful students. I mean, they're so driven. I just loved working with them. They're just such the brightest students I've ever had the pleasure of working with. But when they asked them what field you wanted to go into, okay, of the men, of all the respondents, so that was 2,874, only 4 of them said they were going in equine practice, and only 26 of the women were going to go into equine practice. So that was 30 out of 2,874. So it was about 1% of all the students coming out just a few years ago, vet school, intended to be equine vets. And then how many of them actually went on? That is where the concerning data is. So if you look at, I mean, that's 30 vet schools in the United States. There's 50 United States. That's less than one new equine vet a year per state. And when you talk about somewhere like Texas, where there's 1 million horses, or California, where there's 1 million horses, or Florida, 500,000, but in the winter we get a bunch, or used to get a bunch down. There's over 1 million horses there. Ohio, Virginia, Pennsylvania, I mean, across the United States, Kentucky, obviously a horse hotbed. What about the horses in Montana or Wyoming or Oregon or Washington State? How many equine vets are going there? Not many, if any. So this is a big, big problem. And then just to quote the AVMA, so American Medical Association, when they said they were looking at this, that the population of equine vets is shrinking, they said, quote, so you have this pipeline that's getting smaller and smaller, and now you have half the students that go into equine practice are leaving. So then you really have a small number that you're retaining at the 5 years out mark. We also have a huge number of people retiring on the other end. About 33%, and this is of the American Association of Equine Practitioners, so these are your equine vets, a third are over 60. and 57% are over the age of 45. The AVMA estimates that about 60 equine vets retire every year, and that number is expected to increase by 3% each year. So you're talking about data over the last couple of years when only 1% of all the graduates from vet school are becoming equine vets, and we're losing 60. So that's 30. You're replacing 30. If all 30 of those intend to be equine practitioners and they stick it out, which a lot of them don't stick it out past the 5-year mark, you're looking at the equine vets, the percentages and numbers going way, 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 way down. And some of you probably going, yeah, I have trouble. My vet's overworked, or I have trouble getting a hold of them, or I'm in an area where, again, like I said in the beginning, you're having trouble finding them. So we are in a crisis. Okay. And I see this where I am here in New Zealand. We are short equine vets. We are short equine nurses. We are short food animal veterinarians. We're trying to recruit them from overseas. I see it in Australia. We go up into Europe, same trends, up into Canada, same trends. I can only imagine what South America is going through. So around the planet, you have this big need for veterinary doctors, but they're not there. They're not filling that need. And a lot of that is because there is this long road to become a veterinarian. It is brutally tough. And I'm going to use the US as an example, which is just like Canada, very, very similar setup. Now, I will talk a little bit how it is, in New Zealand, the UK, Europe, and different countries. Becoming a veterinarian is maybe not as arduous, as difficult. That's a big word, but very competitive. It's not to say, oh, I can go and become a veterinarian in New Zealand and then go to the United States. No, you can't. They can come the other way because in the United States they go through a lot more school, and I'll explain that here in a second. But again, the students that do become veterinarians outside of Canada and the U.S., they have to go through a lot of schooling, and they're still some of the brightest students you'll ever come across. And I've worked with some of them. Some of them are my close friends. South America, I've known a lot of veterinarians from Brazil, Colombia, veterinarians here in New Zealand and Australia that I work with. So again, some of the best and brightest students that you'll ever come across. Now, in the US and Canada, it is said that getting into vet school is a lot harder than medical school. They have to take much of the similar curriculum. They have to get similar grades, but the reason it's a little bit harder to get into vet school is because there's fewer of them. Just as an example, in the US, there's 30 vet schools that students can choose from today. Then conversely, there's 155 medical schools. So really the difficulty is finding a slot. That's the hard part for a lot of students. And for many of the vet schools, they give preference to in-state students. So it depends on where they are. So for me, it was California, and very large population, 40 something million people, applicant pool. I'm going to show you some statistics here in a little bit, talk about it, UC Davis, but like 1,000, and they slot 130. So, low acceptance rates. Here's some of the acceptance rates across some of the other schools. Auburn University has a 9% overall acceptance rate. 7.9% of that is in-state students. So students from Alabama. 1.1% are out-of-state applicants. Now, one of the things I used to coach my students on was not only looking to apply in-state, so University of Florida was where a lot of my students went. And then I said, look at out-state and then where they have better success rates. So for example, I would tell them to apply out of state, but your best bet's always in-state. It's always in-state. They have the highest acceptance rates. And GPAs, you're looking anywhere from 3.7 overall to 3.4. Some of the others, 3.4, 3.3. But that is, you're looking at science GPAs. So you couldn't pad your GPA with very easy classes that you get A's. They would also look at your science GPA, and that's had to be 3.3, 3.4, 3.5. So you were getting mostly A's and a few B's. And you had to take things like biology, genetics. I put chemistry for days. I mean, inorganic chemistry, 2 semesters, organic chemistry, 2 semesters, then biochemistry, 1 or 2 semesters, depends on the school you're applying to. Take physics. I had to take 2 semesters of physics, statistics, animal physiology courses. All of these were intense, study forever, very competitive, very difficult to get A's in, very difficult to even get B's in. And you need mostly A's to be competitive for vet school. And then, medical school too, for those students that were looking at that. But so your veterinarians are very, very intelligent, very, very bright. They studied very, very, very hard in those undergraduate years. They didn't have time to go out and have fun. They didn't have time to do a lot because not only did they have to study all the time, and I would coach my students on setting up good study practices, but they needed thousands of hours of animal experience and veterinary clinic experience, which was tough for them to get. So their summers were very busy, where they had to volunteer, work 40 hours all summer if they could do it, or during the school year on top of studying, on top of extracurricular activities that they're expected to do to shine in their application. So these are the presidents and vice presidents and treasurers and social chairs of all the animal science clubs, the vet science clubs, the equine jumping society, whatever it was. These students were so busy, and for an old fuddy-duddy like me, and I did have to work through my undergrad, which was rare, because tuition's so expensive today compared to when I went to school. I guarantee you most of these students have a part-time job. And I would go to bat for all my students all the time against some of my older professors, because in my departments, I'm like, you don't understand, these millennials and Gen Zs, and they are busy. They are working incredibly hard. They are not just going to college life, kicking their feet up, going out and partying and doing all the things you see in social media or wherever, popular culture. I'll tell you what, my students, especially the ones that were going into vet school, they were in the library every night. They were studying every day. They might get to go away on a weekend to the beach or something. That's only if they weren't working, and that's only if they weren't volunteering somewhere. So it was a long road for them just to apply to vet school and be competitive. So I did tell you I was going to talk about the UC Davis stats, and this is pretty typical. If you look, you can go online and look at the universities around the world and look at their admission profiles. So these are the veterinarians that are coming in this year that are going to graduate in 2027. So UC Davis had 937 applicants. They sent offers to 143 and they sat 135. So very, very, very difficult. And the overall science GPA, like I said, how tough this is. This is Davis now. They're regarded as one of the best, if not the best in the world, vet schools. So back in my day, they were very good back in my day, but it wasn't as competitive as it is today. Like an overall science GPA of 3.69. That is nearly straight A's again in all those chemistries, biologies, physics. You can get a few B's, maybe 3, maybe if on a 3.7 GPA, maybe 2 B's probably. They need straight A's in that. And their last 2 semesters GPA was 3.8. So again, almost straight A's in everything they did. Non-residents, so that few, those very, very competitive slots that they give, which was only 19 out of all their applicants in vet school for UC Davis, their science GPAs were 3.94. And then overall last 45 hours, semester hours, was 3.96. So they got one B in something, maybe, or an A minus in something, but that's straight A's. That is straight A's. These are very, very, very bright students. Now, of the career interest, I think this would be very interesting, was equine. They had small animals / equine. So they were going to look at maybe doing a mixed practice. They had 10 students that intended to do that. So one of the things you had to do at Davis back in my day was intend what area you were going to go in. 55 was small animal overall. That's always the most popular. Mixed animals was 37. So that's small and large. But equine, small equine was 10, and then just equine was 9. And we know those numbers drop through the 4 years that they're in vet school, because the 2020 data says we only graduated 30 overall across all vet schools. And that's because I'm going to share some of the data why, but it's also, they find out it's a very difficult life being an equine vet, and you don't get as compensated as some of these other areas. And so these students realize maybe this is not the field for me. Now, the next step, or students, and I just want to put this in here, is there is 2 island nation or island veterinary schools that are very good. There's Ross and St. George's. I have sent many students there that couldn't get into one of the vet schools in the US, continental US. They have a higher acceptance rate, close to it's 44% roughly. And the GPAs are 3.2 to 3.4. So they're not taking marginal students. They're taking good students, or the students that just quite couldn't, say, get into a Davis. And it's a very, very, very good school. There's some good data on it of their graduating class in 2019. And of the 177 that were graduating, they had 3 that wanted to be equine vets. So again, 1%, 1.2% was really low. Starting salaries, this is why I pulled this up. Starting salary average was $90,000 out of all their veterinary graduates. Okay, so from Ross Medical School in St. George's. The starting salary for equine vets was $44,000 a year. So small animal, 94, 95,000, mixed practice, 92,000, food animal. So there is a big need for dairy vets and beef animal vets and stuff like that. They were starting around 82,000 a year, but then you get this huge cliff where the starting salary for an equine vet was $44,000 a year. So that is a big drop off, and that is where we see students in vet schools shying away from veterinary medicine. Now, the other aspect of this is debt, educational debt. And it's a big political issue in the United States and elsewhere. But of these students graduating from these island universities, 47%, nearly half of them, had debt greater than $330,000. So let that sink in again. 48% of these vets that are graduating, so 177 of them. So you take half of that, 85 roughly. 80 to 85 of these students have debt, educational debt, of greater than $330,000. 4 students that graduated reported debt in between the range of $490 and $499,999. So close to $500,000 in educational debt. That is insane. And the ranges are all in there. Only 13% did not have debt. And they must have been very blessed with good funds to fund their education. But most of them are running in that $200,000 to $300,000 range. And in fact, when you look at across all vet schools. So the islands are very much more expensive to go to, higher tuition, higher cost of living. But when you look at veterinarians across the board in the United States, they on average graduate with about $180,000 in debt. It depends on the school you go to. Some of the other ones are close to the average is up in that 300,000 range, where Oregon State University or Oklahoma State, they're 150, 160,000 range. Florida was in that range too, because in-state tuition wasn't quite so much. But for those students going to those overseas or, Ross University or St. George's, they're paying very hefty tuition plus cost of living. And, why Ross University's acceptance rate's very high, they do have a high dropout rate. About 25% of their students drop out. And it's not because, again, these are very bright students. And I still remember a couple of my students when they got in accepted to Ross, and I told them, come talk to me in my office. And I sat them down and I said, okay. And they're vets now. They both went, which I'm very proud of them. But I said, you're going to go to an island nation. You're going to be distracted. You have beautiful beaches. You can go and have a very, very expensive vacation for a year. It's going to cost you $50,000. Or if you're going to go and you're going to study hard, you're going to have some fun, sure, every now and then, but you're going to go and because they have a high dropout rate. And I warned them. I said, if you're going to go and do this, I want you to study. And I'd give them all my study tips, and I would coach and mentor them, and they ended up being vets, which is awesome. But it's just that debt load. And then after they graduate, so again, if you go back as a Ross graduate with, 150,000, or just any graduate, $180,000 in debt, student debt. And then you're getting a job paying 45,000. I've got some more data to show you in Equine Vets. That's where I was sitting years ago going, would I want to do this? And I did a lot of soul searching. Then once you graduate, you need to pass your licensing exam. And a lot of them go off to do residencies for at least a year, if not more, to get more hands-on experience. Most equine vets are not going to go out and start practicing right away. They're going to go to an established hospital or clinic, do a residency for at least a year, if not more, and then go out and join a practice somewhere or try to start their practice, which again, I'll share that in a minute. So that was the Ross data. Now going back to this 2020 data of the 2,800 and something students. Okay, starting salaries for males and equine, of those four, they were starting salaries of 75,000, which was very good. So it's a data point of 4, but you go to the females, and again, this shows definitely some very concerning data with women being paid less. Is in 26 women that were going in to be equine vets, their starting salary is 56,000. So 75,000 for the 4 males, 56,000 for the females. That's a huge disparity. That's very concerning. Now, why? I don't know. They didn't talk about this. If we go and look at some of the other data points, definitely overall, the men are making a little bit more. If we go to food animal, 88,400 for the women, 87,500. Again, that's $1,000 difference. If you do mixed animal, 85,200 for the men, 79,990 for the women. So yeah, there's definitely salary disparity. I mean, that's probably not new for a lot of you listening, but especially in the veterinary field. Now, overall, women are paid about $1,400 less starting salary. You have 266 males, 1,332 females. Definitely some bias there. And I think that the industry needs to address that, because that is not okay. Now, it's not the point of this podcast, but again, even as a older male, it still bothers me because, for all the wonderful students, I've worked with them, my best friends, and to see that disparity is concerning. So something I'm actually going to keep following on. But what that data can show you, I think this is the big takeaway, is equine vets, because most of them are women, $56,000 a year versus 96,000 as a small animal vet. That's a $40,000 difference. And if you can imagine, as a young woman coming out, whether they come out in their 20s, and again, I'm going to talk about this in a minute, you're coming out in your later 20s, your friends all have jobs, making money for years, more established in their jobs by the late 20s, so probably making really good salaries. This is outside of vet school. These are your friends that you knew throughout life. And one day you do want to start a family, or you need to contribute, because most homes today are around the world are 2-income households wherever you live. So that is huge. And so I could see where we are losing equine vets right there, just looking at salary difference. And again, that was when I heard our vet was making 35 grand a year, and this was 2003, 20 years ago. I was like, no way, no way, no way. And when you look outside the US, so here's one in the United Kingdom, and equine vets made up 11% of their veterinary pool, small animals 75%. So that's pretty good. And then that's just private practice. If you look at salaries for veterinarians in other fields, they don't necessarily have to go and be a animal doctor. They can go work in a clinic or a laboratory for a company, or they can get a government job that pays very, very well. You're looking at jobs, bacteriology, mycology, average salaries of $140,000 a year for these veterinarians. In clinical pharmacology, upwards of $150,000. In immunology, so this is looking at maybe research or some of that, they're making upwards of $175,000 a year, specialty salaries. And so if I go and see a equine vet making not much money, and I can go in vet school and go, if I put my area of focus in immunology, I can triple or quadruple that salary. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you do that? The average U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, so again in the United States, the average 2020 salary for veterinarians across the field was $99,250. So that was the average. Small animal vets, what have you. When you looked at specifically equine vets, the best paid was in New York State, and the average salary was $81,896. So half were making more, half were making less. Is all in Wyoming. Equine vets make close to $73,000 a year, probably because not many in there in Wyoming. I know there's a lot of horses up there, but maybe not many equine vets. So again, that disparity, that's almost a $20,000 difference across veterinarians. So your vets aren't making money hand over fist. That is the point of all of this. The other point is these students have had to go through a grueling trial of 3 to 4 years in undergraduate. Most, all of them graduated with a bachelor's degree. Some took 5 years, but most got it done in 4 years, at least in University of Florida. Then they had 4 years of veterinary school. Then they had at least a year of residency. So that's 8-9 year journey. If it was for me, because I did 11 years, but I did a PhD master's, my master's took me 2 years. So some of these students need to get master's degrees, get that bump. Taking 10, 11 years of college. That's tuition, room and board, books, everything, working part-time just to put food on the table, get out with a heavy debt load. not getting the highest salary again for these equine vets, 45,000 to 56,000 roughly for most of them, 60,000. Then you've got to go, and where are you going to practice? A lot of them look to buy into a practice, or they need to be hired by a practice. Now, one of the things that, and I know vet schools are trying to address this, is the business side of being a veterinarian. These are, again, incredibly intelligent students, very book smart, just amazing women and young men. And then now they've got to go and start a business. And they don't have a lot of business classes. There's no room to take business classes. I developed curriculums, and the curriculum for a 4-year pre-veterinary student was packed with science. And we tried to, this semester is going to be brutal. They have to take organic chemistry. They've got to take animal reproduction. They have to take this other course. Gosh, let's put them in a riding class or something fun, go horseback riding, because their brains are going to be fried. Where are we going to fit business classes of all things? So, and on top of that, they need to go learn how to manage not just customers and all that, but then manage employees, vet technicians and things. So it can be overwhelming. When they do look to buy into a practice, and I looked for data on equine vets particularly, couldn't find anything what they're doing, but overall, to buy into a vet practice, it can cost anywhere from $200,000 to $1.5 million and up. And, they said about $1 million for a private small animal practice, $250,000 for a mobile veterinary practice. So if you think of your equine vet in the back of that 4x4, it's going to cost them not just the automobile and all of the equipment, but also when they buy a practice, they're buying that veterinarian's clientele. And then they work with the vet. This is the new one. You've seen it. I'm sure many of you have seen it. The vets I used to ride with, they bought their practice. Particularly the one young vet I rode with a lot, she was being introduced by the old vet. That's the practice she bought with for a year. So she would go out with him. He would introduce her as the new vet coming into the practice, and then he was going to retire. But she had to buy into that. So they have this huge student debt, and now they've got to buy more debt to start a practice or buy into a practice. So I say all this. I don't want to dissuade anybody from going to vet school. We need you. Bottom line, things are changing. I'm going to throw that out there before I lose you. There is opportunities to make good money if you're really focused on that. The industry is waking up in the last few years that we need to support you more. This is just anecdotal. I remember at University of Florida, a farrier came around. Hey, Chris, we're talking one day. He's like, do you know any vets that need work? I've got a farm down the road. This is Ocala, Florida. They need a part-time vet. They're willing to pay upwards of $80,000 a year. Okay, those opportunities exist. There are horse hotbeds like that is desperate need. Again, this was 10 years ago, but still desperate need for veterinarians. And I don't want to scare anybody off from going to vet school. There is some realities that people need to realize about our equine vets, or if they're going into equine veterinary medicine. Okay. But for the majority of you that are horse owners or interested in horses, I'm fighting for your veterinarians today. And I am asking you to put yourself in their shoes. They graduated with all this debt, which is all of us that graduate. I graduated with debt as a graduate student. That's a big worry. Okay, I need to get a job. Okay, but I need to take on more debt to get a job if I'm going into private practice. And so that is where they get a lot of stress. It is extremely stressful. And I go back to that dumb article I opened with that was snarky at this poor young veterinarian who is trying to field questions from this client who is probably, I don't know, I'm not going to get myself in trouble. Anyways, it was frustrating. One thing I would love you all to read, and obviously it's going to be on the screen. The Chronicles of the Horse had a 3-part series last year. Where are all the equine vets? This is an excellent snapshot of where we are. And they have a lot of good quotes from people in the field that are talking about our equine vet shortage in the United States, but then you're seeing this again, like I said, around the world. So Dr. Emma Reed, who is a dean at the Ohio State College of Veterinary Medicine, talking about, to quote her, she's saying, analysis of the AEP data, again, American Association of Equine Practitioners data, and the results of surveys have painted a stark image. Approximately 1.3% of new veterinary school graduates go directly into equine practice, while another 4.5% continue their training in equine internships. And she said the number's way down than it was 10 years ago. But within 5 years, 50% of all these new vets leave. They either switch to small animal or they leave veterinary medicine altogether. And she said you have this pipeline of veterinarians getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And now half of the students that even go into equine vet practice are leaving. You have a huge volume of all of those people retiring. Like I said, a third of your equine practitioners in the United States today are over the age of 60. They're retiring and we're not replacing them. So it is this big problem. Now, some of the reasons why. This is why they postulate why. And I thought about it because it was like I put myself in my students' shoes, my shoes. It was the calculus of it all. The calculus for me supporting a family. The sacrifices required. So I seriously thought about going to medical school for a while. I'm like, if I'm going to go to 4 years, but I don't know. I'm not a human. I love people, but I'm not. Animals is my thing. That is my life's work and passion, obviously. And then, so the business side, once I think you get into it or realize it, then, like I said earlier, many more women are becoming vets. And so what they're thinking, the vet schools are thinking, they said a lot of it is this generation of students coming from 2-parent households that are working, how their moms and their dads had to work very hard. And there wasn't a lot of great work-life balance. So a lot of these students today say, wow, I don't want a career where I can't enjoy my life. You're seeing that in this younger generation. Then they say by the time an equine vet's entering the workforce, so 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of vet school, and then a year or two of internship, she's near the end of her 20s. She maybe married, maybe wants to get married, maybe wants to start a family. And when you're talking about a job making, we saw 56,000 on average starting, you start to really doubt, okay, why would I go into this field? And then equine vets work on average about 58 hours a week. So where's that work-life balance? And, I used to think about this too, because I went through this whole decision tree. Equine vets got to work 24/7. And I remember the vet I was working with, this was during my master's, when she came in, she was like, I can't take vacation. I remember her just talking about, because I was questioning her about her business. And she said, Chris, I can't take a day off. If I take a day off, my client will call my competitor, because there was 3 equine vets in around the Fresno area at the time. And I'll lose them as a client, most likely, because I couldn't go out to their farm. And so, well, I can't get this vet. This guy came out, or this woman came out. I'm going to use them now. So it hurts their business. If you don't come out with every client call, they felt like they had to be working 24/7. And it wasn't just the business aspects, but think about it from a veterinarian standpoint. I love animals. I love horses. And if I get a call at midnight that my horse is colicking or their horse is colicking and I'm the vet, I've got to go out and treat this animal. I am not going to let that animal suffer till morning. Gosh, no. And no, like I'm going to jump up, get in my truck and drive however long it is to that farm and take care of that animal. And that's what a lot of these vets do, because it's not just ethical and good for business. They, that's their drive. That's why they do what they do. And when you look at small animal vets, they clock out. Now they work long days. I've kind of many friends that are small animal vets, work very long hours, used to work 6, 7 o'clock at night, but then they were done, doors closed. If there was any problems after that, there's emergency small animal clinics. And I've taken my dogs there and they're very expensive. That's why you don't go back there for normal treatment, because they're that expensive. But they're after hours clinics available for small animals where there really traditionally hasn't been for equine vets. So that leads me into the part 2 of this article, new approaches to emergency coverage. A lot of these equine vets are realizing being on call 24/7, working close to 60 hours a week isn't the type of life that's be acceptable today. It's just not. And even then, you probably have equine vets turning away business because they have too much. There's not enough of them out there to cover all the animals and all the emergencies and all the things they need to do. So what they're talking about is coming up with new approaches and getting some of these things, developing these emergency co-ops, which could be an answer for a lot of these equine vets, where there are different vet clinics or equine veterinarians will come into a co-op together and agree, okay, Dr. Jessica, you're going to handle emergencies Mondays and Tuesdays. Dr. Brooke, you're going to do Wednesdays and Thursdays. Dr. Chris, you're doing Fridays, Saturdays, and then we'll all alternate a Sunday, something like that. We keep our clients, but we enter a cooperative where I'm on call those late nights, and the other nights of the week, I don't have to worry about it. I can turn my phone off, messages off. I know my clients are covered. And so they're developing this, and they're starting to encourage equine vets to do this, because as consumers or us as clients, we need to support our equine vets like this, where if I have an emergency, and I know it's always I'm dealing with Dr. Chris, but if he's off and I know Dr. Brooke is on call and that's who's coming out to treat my horse, I have to be okay with that. And I'm still going to use Dr. Chris for my normal day-to-day stuff, but in emergencies, I understand, because we're going to lose them. We're going to lose a lot of these vets, and we're going to lose good people. And it's just going to hurt the industry and hurt our horses in the end. So then there is a couple vets, again, this article and show it to you, but there are some vets in Kentucky and probably some of these other equine hotspots, probably like in Ocala, Florida, parts of New York and California, where you have equine emergency clinics, and they only handle emergencies. And they could be mobile clinics or they could be hospitals, but there are veterinarians that are starting to just specialize in emergency medicine only. So they don't do the day-to-day horse stuff, but they will handle colics, difficult foalings, any lameness that's an emergency or stuff like that. So that is encouraging that there's strategies in place to help our current equine vets out there to have a better quality of life. And so they don't burn out and they don't quit or they don't move, because if they move, there's probably not someone that's going to be able to replace them. And that's going to hurt you in the end. Now, part 3 of this series is we need more equine vets. So this whole podcast has just shown you, wow, it's not easy. But how do we recruit them? How do we pay them more? How do we ensure they have a better quality of life? Well, some of that is the emergency response, because that's a big one. That's a very, very big one for them, that they don't have to be on call 24/7. I think a lot of equine vets, I would have taken a salary cut. I mean, I was in education, for goodness sakes. Of course I would. To be an equine vet versus some of the other fields of medicine, because I love my dogs. I love cats. I love all creatures, but when it came to medicine, there was no way I was going to be a doggy vet. I just didn't want to. It wasn't my drive. I was going to be an equine vet. And so taking a bit of a salary hit's fine. It's just that quality of life was a big one. So things are changing to help them. The other part is recruitment. So a lot of the AVMA or the AAEP, these organizations, I see it here in New Zealand and elsewhere in the world. The equine vet industry is centered around supporting new vets and vet students, and even undergrads, to encourage them to get in there. Now, I want to quote this because this is Rhonda Rathberger. She's a DVM, equine vet at Hagyard Equine Medical Institute. Been there. Gorgeous, huge hospital. Lexington, Kentucky is just awesome. And she said her daughter was a sophomore. Again, this was published last year. So at Auburn University, and was going to follow in her mom's footsteps and pursue equine medicine. But she's seen some hurdles. So to quote her, Dr. Rhonda said, I would listen to what her advisors would tell her. And she got a job at the vet school as soon as she got to Auburn, and what all the doctors were telling her at Auburn about how horrible equine practice was. She shouldn't do it. And to be honest, it was gut-wrenching to me because I made a really good life being an equine veterinarian, and I was proud that she could see me doing something I loved, and for her to want to do it and then have so much discouragement, it's disheartening. She said, I feel like we're losing them at all levels. And so that's just, that's what her daughter experienced. I, as a advisor to, again, hundreds of undergrads that applied to vet school, many went on to vet school, I asked them what field of medicine they'd want to be in. I didn't discourage them from anything. I would just give them realities. Look at the data. I'd never had an agenda. I just said, you want to be an equine vet? It's an awesome field. Here's the information. Here's probably where you should apply. For students going to Ross, like I said, I warned them about certain things. Just stay focused and graduate, because we need vets. We need vets in all fields, to be honest. So you're seeing this huge discouragement from industry, from certain segments of academia, saying, don't go into equine medicine. It's not worth it. It's a very difficult life. Especially if I was a small animal vet and I knew we needed more small animal vets, I would try to recruit them to my side. But so there is some of this discouragement, and the AVMA, the overall vet association, realizes that, and they're saying this is actually a great time to come out as an equine vet because there is a shortage. And you're able to go and start picking your hours. You're able to start dictating higher salaries and a better quality of life because you're in demand. So there is a big push with these vet schools to help students that do want to specialize in equine and come out as graduates. So I hope that gives you a snapshot and a deeper appreciation for what your veterinarians are faced with day to day. I mean, there's a lot to dissect here. There's more to this story. And I didn't want to go down certain paths because veterinarians across the world are faced with a lot. They're faced with irate customers. They're faced with animal death all the time. That's horrible. We imagine when we lose one of our companions, when we have to euthanize a horse or any of our animals, and how heartbreaking that is for us. Imagine from the vet's perspective. Again, they love these animals. Almost every student I ever came across had such a deep, deep love for animals and want to work with them day in, day out. They were incredibly intelligent, incredibly ambitious. But again, they're graduating with a heavy debt load than ever before. They're under tremendous amount of pressure. It takes a toll on them. And, I think we as clients need to understand and appreciate them more than we do. And I know a lot of you do. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I've always loved my vets that I've worked with and that they've ever worked on my animals, always appreciative. But I think we need to go that extra little step. And here's some of the things you can do to help your equine vets. Have a relationship with them, cultivate one. Understand you just can't cold call them when there's an emergency and expect them to show up. Unless they know who you are and you're a client of theirs. When they show up to your farm, have your horses ready for them. Remember, they're incredibly busy. We've got a lot of people that they need to see, a lot of horses they need to see. You can make their lives easier with that. Understand what makes an emergency and how to contact them. And if you're not sure, so like I said, some of these vets might starting emergency after hours contacts with other vets. So be open to that with them. And during non-business hours, ask them, in case of an emergency, where do I go? Who do I call? And again, knowing what's an emergency or not. These young vets, give them a break. Like I said that article in the beginning, like, my goodness, gives me such a headache. Let them work on your horses and, understand that they're maturing into the position. So as a young veterinarian, like, we all started off in careers not knowing everything, right? And still learning. I mean, I'm still learning every day. And, give them a break and help them out. And, like I said, always be willing to go with new ideas to help their practice, their work-life balance. We need to help them do that. Pay them promptly so they're not chasing you around for bills. When they give you a bill, pay it right away. That way it takes a lot of stress off them. And then just let them know you appreciate them. And just say, you know what, I love, working with you. And I appreciate what you do for me and my animals. Because, I mean, this podcast, when I put this together, made me reflect a lot of my own life. And I always go that, God, I took, it was a fork in the road in my life. One of those that we all face every now and then. And it was like, do I go the vet route? And sometimes I reflect back, like, what would my life be like if I did go to vet school and I was a practicing equine vet? Where would I be today? Would I still be in academia in a vet school teaching somewhere? Maybe I would be in private practice somewhere in like a equine hotbed. I don't know, but maybe in an alternate universe, I am a DVM instead of a PhD, but I do know, there are hundreds of vets, thousands of vets around the world specializing in equine medicine. And I appreciate them so much. And I just ask you to appreciate them because they're caring for our greatest companion, the horse, right? So anyways, I appreciate you watching this. I appreciate you taking this to heart and this information to heart and helping us, thank our equine vets and support our equine vets. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel for more of this. Like this video, please. I appreciate it. You can also check us out on social media, TikTok, all of Instagram, Facebook, all of those. Look for Mad Barn. You can always go to madbarn.com, learn tab for more information on any topics you're looking at. But again, overall, this is all about the vets and the veterinarians out there. So for any of you that do want to go to vet school, do it. You can always email me, podcast@madbarn.com. But, for any of the equine vets out there watching, thank you. Thank you for what you do.